Welcome back to Bloomberg Markets to Close. Time now for our Wall Street Week daily segment with David Weston, the host of Wall Street Week. You've been talking with a lot of key players as we sort of try to navigate where we are in this banking crisis. And you actually spoke with probably somebody who's probably one of the more candid CEOs, former CEOs, we should say. John Mack used to run Morgan Stanley. He was candid when he ran Morgan Stanley, and I'm told he's still pretty candid.
Morgan Stanley is how we identify him. That's where he spent his career largely. But we forget the fact he ran Credit Suisse for 3 years and actually had a lot of problems with Credit Suisse. So we got to sit down and talk to him about a lot of that. And specifically what went wrong at Credit Suisse, why he had problems when he was there, and did they ever get them fixed? This is part of what he said about Credit Suisse and then the U.S. banking system.
I think the transition from being a Swiss private bank to a publicly held bank, that the rules and reporting have changed. I mean, the Swiss banks, I remember years ago when I was there, you could go down in their vaults, you would see pieces of art locked up, things like that. And I think they had a real advantage of bank secrecy. They had a lot of people around the world who wanted to be protected, who would put money in there knowing it would be secure, safe, and secretive. And the world's changed, and that's what they're dealing with because they need to change with it.
Well, you tried to change Credit Suisse a fair amount when you were there, and you made a fair number of changes, but the board didn't always like it. I mean, they said they had some choice words for you, like arrogant. You had some choice words for them as well.
Yeah, they said I'm the most arrogant person they ever met. And I said, they're the stupidest people I've ever dealt with. So we had a great relationship. And as soon as my contract was up, they shot me, so it was fine.
But when you say stupid, what didn't they get from your point of view? I mean, you've spent a lifetime in banking. You know banking. What didn't they understand?
You need to build a financial service business built on trust and built on not hiding money or putting money in different spots, but you need to be open. You need to give a return on the investments or the assets someone gives you. And just having bank secrecy is not enough, and I don't think they got that. And for years, the Swiss was a haven for people all over the world who wanted to put money away. They did. And, you know, for those who were putting the money in, it made a lot of sense. But long term, I think it really hurt the Swiss banks in a competitive way. They weren't as competitive as they should have been. And they're great banks. They just needed to open up the vault a little more and not be so secretive.
It looks like we're in for a new era now, as UBS is slated to take over Credit Suisse to purchase it at a bargain rate. And Colm Keller, somebody you know well, worked for you, is going to take it over. What do you expect Colm Keller and UBS to do with Credit Suisse?
Well, I think they'll look, number one, where there are overlaps, and there'll be a lot of overlaps. And you want to get the best people from each institution and still have those lines of businesses, but with a better Rolodex of who are the talented people in the two banks. So I see it business as usual, but I think it'll be a smaller institution when they put them together. And I think they will focus on performance, not just bank secrecy.
You've spent a lifetime managing risk, knowing when to take it, when not to take it.
Right.
Is it likely they'll take less risk? Already we've had Colm Keller say, we want to cut back on the investment bank. Yeah. We're not as interested in the investment bank. Would you expect the sort of profile of the bank to shift?
Yeah, I do, but I think that's universal. I think the big banks who've had big trading positions and taken a lot of risk, I think they've all dialed that back. And clearly the Swiss is going to do that. Now, when I was there, it was First Boston was their investment bank, and the amount of risk that we took was really out of proportion to what we should have been doing. So I think all the banks are focused a lot more on risk. I think the regulators are better at defining and seeing the risk, but I think banks have to maintain confidence in their institution. And when you have big swings, when you take a huge loss on some risk position, it hurts their credibility and it hurts the trust that people have in them. So I think most of these banks are going to be much more conservative in the risk they take.
Is the big banking business in the United States as interesting as it was when you were in it? In this sense, a lot of the business has gone into private credit now. Right. It's gone out from the regulatory part. Right. And the big money center banks, as you say, have gotten a lot more conservative. You built a career actually on taking risk.
Yeah. Some would argue we took too much risk. And thank God for the Chinese and Japanese who helped us get through all that. Yeah, I think given the crisis that we all went through years ago, I think bank boards are much more astute, much more involved. And I think the CEOs and treasurers of the institutions are really concerned about how much risk are we taking and how much can we afford.
How would the world have looked, the financial world have looked different if, in fact, J.P. Morgan had bought Morgan Stanley and you didn't have a Morgan Stanley anymore? What would it have meant for the overall economy and the financial world?
Well, look, I think to have a broad-based investment banking community gives you better ideas, creative ideas, and also it dissipates risk over a much larger platform. So I think concentration, too much concentration is a negative. And if we'd have lost Morgan Stanley, and it would have eroded, I think, the investment banking business, which I believe really diversifies risk. It also is very creative, a global business, and I think helps liquidity in the market. Plus, also hiring a lot of people who do really well in helping companies. So it would have been a disaster if we had gone down, and I think it would have been a domino effect. And thank God for Hank Paulson. And when you talk about heroes, Hank Paulson's a hero. He really stood up.
When you talk about hiring people, you've made it clear in your book that people are really what it's all about, getting the right people, getting in the right places. You have a couple that you had working for you that have gone on. We have, of course, James Gorman running Morgan Stanley, who's done a pretty good job by all accounts.
A great job. Yep.
And Colm Kelleher now, who's back in the spotlight running UBS, which is going to take over Credit Suisse. What do you think about Colm Kelleher as a leader?
I think he's a first-class leader. Clearly, he's very smart. And I think working together through the crisis, it showed that he was able to keep his financial team on board. In other words, people were close to panicking, and he calmed them down, and I gave him a little bit of help on that, but he did it. So he's a natural leader, and I think he's a natural for what he's going to do in Switzerland.
Finally, what does it take to be calm in the middle of a crisis? You did it with respect to the pressure put on Morgan Stanley. You just talked about Colm Kelleher in the crisis. You were there in some really difficult times. What separates the people who can handle that from the ones who can't?
I want to say stupidity. I knew if I cracked, they all cracked. So I had to put on a face that, I'll never forget Tom Nod saying to me, you act like nothing's going on. Well, what they didn't know, I would shut my office door and just try to pull myself together. I couldn't show the stress or fear that we were under. And I'll never forget calling Christy, my wife, and saying, Christy, I don't know if I can get this done. And you turn to people you can trust, and people who know you well, and people who are not going to leak, oh God, John Mack is really frightened about the crisis. And for me, the best person was Christy. And then I had other people like Tom Nods, who's a close friend, very astute. And he was one of the few people who would constantly come to my office and say, you stupid, you can't do that. And you need someone to put a mirror in front of you and challenge you.
That was John Mack, former chairman and CEO of Morgan Stanley. And Romaine, I referred to his book there. He has a new memoir out called Up Close and All In. I've read it. It has all of this in it, Credit Suisse as well as Morgan Stanley. And it's really a great read.
Yeah, and it's a fascinating interview, too, because it gets to the heart, too, of the real challenge ahead for Credit Suisse and UBS, that this isn't just about them coming together. It's really about how you integrate all this, how you sort of deal with the overlaps, and more importantly, how you deal with what he talked about, which was risk-taking. What does risk-taking look like?
And what is likely to be a new era of reduced risk, in general in banking, but specifically in Switzerland.
Yeah, and he references Colm Kelleher and sort of the new First Boston or whatever that is going to be called here, and I think that's another big issue as well.
Might well be a lot more emphasis on wealth management, which UBS has done really well at, maybe a little less on the investment banking side.